Hey, Shalom, Rastafari, Habarim, greetings and welcome, guests, friends, visitors, family members. We've got a real important subject to clarify and present to the Torah observant community and to the general public in accordance with the goodwill of the Creator and the most noble objectives such as world peace, collective security, justice, peace, and a rule of international morality. And the subject that we're talking about here is the freedom of religion and the accommodation of Torah observant peoples, and how, basically speaking, the right to freely practice your religion in accordance with existing legitimate law and order as set forth by, for example, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, is a right that's guaranteed to all, as we are all human beings and have inalienable human rights and responsibilities. Now, if you're Torah observant, you're basically not supposed to work or perform occupational labor from Friday sunset to Saturday sunset as a general rule all the time, right? And supposed to rest on the high holy days, for example, during Passover or first fruits or Shavuot or Tabernacles or Sukkot, or during the Shemitah year or the Jubilee year, or whenever God commands it, basically. Now, the right to freely practice these, shall we say, religious duties is guaranteed to us in accordance with the existing international order as set forth in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and in accordance with the framework that the international community has agreed on and signed on to, particularly within the United Nations and specifically within all UN member states. All persons are equal before the law. This is particularly important for the Torah observant community. In keeping God's commandments, right, there are times when we're supposed to work and there are times when we're supposed to rest. And we all have the inalienable rights in accordance with legitimate international law and local and national laws and even different national constitutions of different countries and UN member states to freely practice our religion in accordance with the law, okay? So here's the thing that's very important. Somebody who is Torah observant, in fact, all peoples, right? Yet specifically, we're talking about Torah observant lifestyle and how it's legally protected internationally, and how we have the right to freely exercise our religious duties in accordance with, shall we say, legitimate and just jurisprudence and international law and order, right? As set forth by the UN and also the UDHR, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, in that where if you work somewhere, whether you're self-employed or you're employed somewhere, you're protected against, you're legally, actually all persons, remember this is for everybody too, specifically though in this case, we're legally protected against any form of discrimination. So any type of discrimination on the basis of race, religion, creed, national origin, religious view, etc. All of this, though, as with all things, being in a certain accordance with a certain amount of law and order as set forth in, for example, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So if you work somewhere, right, whatever the case may be, especially if it's a UN member state that has signed, basically the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted it as, what's it called? Government policy, right? Well, then, especially there and then, yet even universally by God's command also, you have the right to, say, freely exercise your religion, albeit in accordance with international law. And you're protected against any form of discrimination, and it is forbidden, right, for anybody or any company or any employer or any business owner or operator, whatever it is, in fact, anyone whatsoever even, to basically, to, shall we say, negatively discriminate or to discriminate against you, or to deny you employment or to fire you because of being basically like Torah observant and having, the legitimate objective and the wish and the will to basically perform your religious duties and to basically not work on Saturdays, right? So the thing is that even in today's world, there is a rule of international morality. There's a law, an order. It's international law and order that exists. And we have to read, study, learn, and do this, right? Now, typical scenario. Somebody goes somewhere to go to work somewhere, and they mention that they would like to have Saturdays off for religious reasons and a couple of days a year for, religious high holy days when we're supposed to basically cease from occupational labor and it's days of rest, right? What is that? It's the 3 pilgrim feasts, the Sabbaths, the Shemitah year, and the Jubilee year, right? And this is totally legit. So if somebody, right? If somebody, for example, if you apply for work somewhere and you mention that, you'd like to have Saturdays off and a couple days a year as days of rest, right? It does not matter who, what, where, what company, what industry, everybody, all of us are equal before the law. We all have the same human rights and responsibilities. There is an international, standard, legitimate, and just law and order state in operation. It's called the UN. Things like UN Covenants 1 and 2, and particularly and specifically a rule of international morality and law and order as set forth by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Okay? There's about 30 articles in that document. It covers things like freedom of religion, right to safety of person, protection against, discrimination on the basis of race, religion, creed, national origin, etc. You got to know this, right? Like, learn this, read it, study it, think about it, do it, work with it, and win with it. And all of this and everything and whatever there is that's guaranteed to us by this document is also guaranteed to us to basically, so that we utilize this in accordance with the general legitimate framework. Because I mentioned this too. Listen, if I say that, for example, I have the right to freely exercise my religion, protected by international law. Yes, but in accordance with, like, shall we say, certain parameters that exist, right? So, like, what I'm saying is that, there's a general standard framework that's internationally put in place. It's set forth in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, UN Resolution 217A, right? Now, in that document, for example, things like, so human rights violations are forbidden by law. So one cannot go and say, look, somebody, for whatever reason, somebody could say, hey, look, my religion requires me, to this, and this. Well, hold on a minute. If that violates the UDHR, then it's not permissible. So in other words, how do I say this? Freedom of religion exists, yet it exists within certain parameters that are internationally set and are mandatory in terms of you shall not kill, you're not allowed to, what is that? Basically go and commit human rights violations, or like there are things, everybody has a right to safety of person, right to self-determination, to basically live a legitimate, happy, peaceful, and a free and a good life, okay? So there are certain standards too within the international framework. Yet, for example, generally speaking, because if I say freedom of religion, it's a very broad spectrum nowadays. Yet, basically, you're not allowed to, violate other people's human rights, and we all have human rights, like right to self-determination, right to safety of person. All persons are equal before the law, right? You can't, force anybody. You can't, you can't put anybody in bondage. You can't violate anyone's human rights. And there wouldn't be, and in accordance with, and that wouldn't even happen in accordance with, shall we say, true religion. Yet that is secondary. What I'm saying is that all of us human beings everywhere, we all have the same human rights and responsibilities and freedoms and sort of things that we're supposed to adhere to. Because that's the only way that such a massive amount of humans in such a giant number can actually coexist with each other. So, listen, let's just look at some of the things that exist today, right? For example, in some countries, apparently, there have been reports of human rights violations. Perhaps things like bondage, or what's known as what they called slavery. Those things are forbidden by law and by international law. So one cannot say, hey, look, it's part of my religion that I go out and, no, you can't do that. You can't keep people in bondage against their will, or force other people to perform labor, or undermine or attack others' human rights and freedoms. You can't do that. It's illegal. So freedom of religion exists universally, and it exists within a certain framework that is actually non-religious, yet is very intelligently designed. And that's primarily the UDHR as like a world constitution, actually. Everybody's got the right to safety of person, right? Nobody can be forced into like bondage, or forced to perform into servitude, or involuntary servitude, or forced labor, or anything like that. All that's forbidden. So, because some religions, apparently, and we've heard of this, and it's obvious, okay, you can do the research yourself, they actually have things that they have done that are obvious within the international sphere that are immediate human rights violations. So freedom of religion, it's interesting. Freedom of religion only goes so far as that there is a certain standard of justice that is maintained and kept and respected in accordance with it. And that, though, is absolutely sufficient for us all. Now, more often, typically, the problems usually are that, for example, if you're Torah observant, an employer, when interviewing candidates and applicants, might think, look, hey, this person has a requirement to cease from working on Saturdays, but I have so much business on the weekend. Well, so what? It doesn't matter. You cannot discriminate against somebody who doesn't work on Saturdays, no matter if that's the biggest day in your business, because you have to respect the law. So it's like, in all things, we have to respect the law and utilize a gold standard that is the best for everybody. Not just for us, for everyone. Because, see, look, that what is legal triumphs over that what is illegal and has precedence and trumps everything. that what is legitimate, that what is altogether just, shalt thou follow, right? In other words, that what is the absolute highest and purest and most legitimate form of justice, that's how you're supposed to live, and that's what you're supposed to practice. And the more we do that, the better and the safer and the happier and the healthier and the freer and the more peaceful and collectively secure the world gets. And that's it. So that's how it is. You can look it all up for yourself. Make sure to double check anything I've mentioned. Read the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and know for a fact that if you're Torah observant, if you have religious requirements that actually, require you not to work on Saturdays and on, maybe 20 days a year or whatever, or like, what is that? If you have a religious requirement not to work on Saturdays, all the time, you can work all the other days, but you can't work on Saturday. Okay. And you got, what is it, like a handful of days a year that are days of rest. Like 20 days a year or something where you're not supposed to work, right? And you're not supposed to work Saturdays, generally. Even that has to be accommodated by anyone and everyone. And it doesn't matter whether business interest is, a topic. The law is equally applicable. All are equal before the law, and you gotta follow the law. So look, listen. For example, if you work in the hospitality industry, right? Generally speaking, there are days, but see, that's not even the case either. But generally though, Saturday and Sunday are very big days. Now, I have actually worked in the hospitality industry before, and I mentioned to the employer during the interview that I really would like to actually cease from working Friday sunset to Saturday sunset, and basically a handful of days in the year. It was no problem. They accommodated my religious requirements, right? And I was going to say, maybe I should, a big company, I'll tell you what, a real big company. And just because of that, I have a very good opinion of them to this day. So, it's possible to live, be Torah observant these days. But listen, really, you got to know the law, follow the law, and be a doer of the law legitimately, because that's the only way it's going to work. So nowadays, there's a couple of key, nowadays there's a couple of documents that every person everywhere should read and understand. You should know, read, study, practice your human rights and responsibilities. Read the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, okay? Now listen, if we go somewhere for an interview, right, and this probably applies to so many other people too. If you go somewhere for an interview and you mention in the interview, hey, it doesn't even matter if you mention it or not. If you tell them, I'm available for 6 days, yet Friday sunset to Saturday sunset, I really would like to rest because I'm supposed to for religious reasons. That has to be accommodated. It does not matter who, what, when, where. That's it. There's a rule of law that has to be respected, right? So even the same thing, if you're Torah observant, you have to be equally, you have to be basically treated with the equal amount of favor and legitimate positive receptivity by anyone and everybody. Doesn't matter who, what, when, where. There's a rule of law in place. It's the case universally and internationally, and that's it. And it's good. It's a good thing because it makes for peace and security and safety for all humans, for all persons. The problem is that there are, in fact, there's humans that do not know these things. And usually violations of the law actually happen because of a lack of education, a lack of knowledge. Mostly not even because of willful, malintent, bad intention. It's usually because they don't know. So education about human rights, that is a top priority for every institution out there. Read and study and practice the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Study it in your schools, in your colleges, in your universities. That is a basic order of the day for all of us, because that's the only way, generally speaking, even in 2026 and beyond, that the complete and total international community and humanity at large will somehow be able to collectively and universally, peacefully and safely coexist and have a good life and destiny. That's about as close as we can get, because human beings, being so very different, yet also generally the same on certain levels, have to have some type of communal framework that supports everybody and that also protects everybody and makes it possible for a coexistence. And it is possible. The problem nowadays is usually ignorance of the law, and ignorance and lack of knowledge, actually. That's most often, that is the problem. Now, I've talked about this enough, so I think that it will be properly comprehended here.